The Jets shocked the NFL by trading Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. And one thing is clear, Aaron Glenn is now in charge of a massive rebuild. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is a bonus episode of Locked On Jets here on Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. And I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, the reason for this bonus show is the Jets were very active at the trade deadline. In fact, they made some shocking moves. Sauce Gardner traded to Indianapolis for 2 first-round picks. Quinnen Williams traded to Dallas for a future first-round pick and a second-round pick. We're going to break this down from all angles. We'll talk about how this changes expectations for the rest of 2025. We'll talk about reasons for skepticism, but we'll also talk about the reasons the Jets made these trades. And I have to say, I'm shocked. I think the episode I did earlier today is a Hall of Fame episode for everything I got wrong on that show, because I said that there was no way the Jets would trade Sauce Gardner. I think I said anybody who said that was, participating in clickbait. I thought there was no way the Jets would eat all the dead money. It's around $20 million in dead money the Jets will eat. I thought the Jets wanted to keep Sauce Gardner. I mean, felt like that was pretty logical, since considering they just signed him to a big extension a few months ago to make him the highest paid corner in the NFL. Well, no, Sauce Gardner is a former member of the New York Jets, and so is Quinnen Williams, who I was skeptical the Jets would trade, because I figured with a player of his magnitude, with what he would command in a trade, the new team would want a contract extension in place. Well, in my defense, the Jets were dealing with Jerry Jones, who doesn't always do things by the book. So I'll defend myself a little bit on that one. But a huge day for the New York Jets franchise, as they send 2 of their best 3 players out. Really, 2 of the 3 top 100 players in the NFL the Jets have had were traded today. And the Jets get a big return in terms of draft picks. The Jets have kind of been selling. The Jets kind of sold the idea to the media, if you looked at some of the reports, that they weren't inclined to trade either of these guys, but they were just blown away by the offers. I don't buy that in terms of Sauce Gardner. I don't think that there was anything shocking about Sauce Gardner bringing back 2 first-round picks. If you look historically what all pro caliber players command in their prime, it's about 2 first-round picks. This was not an unprecedented trade package. In fact, it's actually less than the Jets got for Jamal Adams back in 2020. And it's about what the Rams got for traded for Jalen Ramsey to Jacksonville a few years back. So there's nothing unprecedented about what the package the Jets got in return. If the package you'd get if you were actively looking to trade for a Sauce Gardner, it's what you would consider fair compensation. Jets also got a receiver, Adonai Mitchell, but he was, kind of a throw-in. So, I don't buy that the Jets were, Jets weren't inclined to trade Sauce Gardner. They just got a deal they couldn't refuse, because this deal was probably on the table from a lot of teams. This is a deal the Jets could have gotten in the offseason. I think the Jets are spinning this that, they didn't want to trade Sauce, that they weren't going to trade Sauce Gardner. They just got a deal they couldn't refuse, because there's going to be fans upset that you traded one of your best players. And reports have come out since the Jets traded Quinnen Williams that there was a lot of unhappiness behind the scenes between the Jets and Quinnen. And it's tough to blame Quinnen. The team hasn't won while he's here. So, you look at the rationale for these moves. Now, one of the things I've mentioned this week is that it's very, there's a famous trade in NFL history that is frequently cited, trading a great player and getting enough draft picks that you can completely rebuild your team. It's the Herschel Walker trade. It's a trade the Dallas Cowboys made in 1989. Herschel Walker was like the one good player they had. And the Cowboys ended up getting a huge number of picks, and those picks helped to build a dynasty in the 1990s. And one of the things I said is that, there's really no such thing as a Herschel Walker trade in today's NFL. Teams are not going to give up the amount of picks the Minnesota Vikings gave up in 1989 for one player. But it's almost like the Jets may have recreated the Herschel Walker trade in the aggregate by trading 2 of these guys, because if you look at the way the Jets are set up right now, they will have 8 picks in the first 2 rounds of the next 2 drafts. Now, if you want to talk about how you rebuild quickly in the NFL, how you turn a losing franchise into a winning franchise, there's no better recipe than having a ton of early picks and having a lot of first round picks, a lot of second round picks. Jets added, Jets added 3 first round picks, and they added a second round pick to the picks that they already own. And they're going to have a high first round pick of their own in 2026. So, this is the type of move that if you get it right, it can be the type of thing that turbocharges a rebuild. Now, the important thing is getting the picks right. Jimmy Johnson, who made that famous trade in 1989 with the Minnesota Vikings, said that, the trade would not have been any good if they had picked the wrong players. The most important part of that trade was that the Dallas Cowboys picked the right players who helped launch a dynasty, who launched a team that won 3 Super Bowls in a 4-year stretch in the 1990s. This is a legacy move for Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci. There are a handful of days that really decide whether a GM and head coach are successful. And one other takeaway you can have is that Aaron Glenn's very much in charge here, and all of the speculation, and we've done a little bit of it here about, when the Jets got off to a bad start, could Aaron Glenn be one and done? It's clear that was never in the cards. And it's clear that any commentary I made about that, any commentary anybody else made about that was completely off base, because I don't think you'd be allowed to trade 2 of your 3 best players if the owner was thinking about getting rid of you. In fact, if you thought your job was in danger based on your team's performance this year, you would not trade 2 of your 3 best players halfway through the season. This is a clear sign of confidence. And you wouldn't do it for picks that are a year down the line, because a couple of the picks the Jets got are 2027 picks. So, in fact, I think the Jets actually got more draft capital in 2027 than 2026. So this is a sign that Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci feel very secure in their jobs, that they don't just think they'll be back next year. They think they have at least 2 years to turn this thing around. So there's a lot to take in here, but it's clear that this is a Jets regime that is thinking of the long run. In some ways, that's a very welcome sign, because the Jets are not a team that has traditionally thought in the long run all that frequently. It's clear that they have a longer term horizon. And what this comes down to now is whether or not they make the right choices. We know now the Jets are almost certainly going to take a quarterback. I think that was close to being a lock anyway. But now, after you trade 2 of your 3 best players, Garrett Wilson's the only top 100 player left on this team right now. There's not going to be a lot of buzz next year if you don't draft a quarterback. We know a Woody Johnson team always has to have buzz. But the other element to this, and one of the things I've discussed on the show over the last couple of weeks, is, I'm not sure the Jets necessarily have the best infrastructure to develop a quarterback. Well, there's only, the infrastructure issues go beyond the roster, but there are some roster issues with the infrastructure. And this many early picks can help you build a quality offense that maybe makes it a little bit easier to support a young quarterback. So perhaps there's some of that in mind. As great as Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner are, they're defensive players. And if you're going to draft a quarterback in the spring, over the next 2 years, it would be great if you could surround him with other premium talent. Now, the Jets, have a makings of a pretty decent young offensive line with Armand Membou at right tackle, and hopefully Olu Fashanu grows at left tackle. And they do have Garrett Wilson at wide receiver, but there are other pieces needed to fill in around this offense. And perhaps all of these extra picks give you the resources that you need to help build that up. So, I think it's pretty clear why the Jets did this. I mean, this is a 1-7 football team. This is a team that, was not going anywhere this year, and a team where the horizon is longer. It just got longer now. The Jets made a couple very long-term focused moves in this trade deadline. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, I'm going to speak to the skeptics, because I understand that deals like this are popular in one segment of the fan base and very unpopular in another segment of the fan base. And we'll talk about why fans might be upset and why your feelings are justified as we continue here on this special Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's special edition of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Built. Nobody likes paying rent, but if you must, you might as well get something for it. That's where Built comes in. Built is changing the game by turning your rent payment into real rewards that you can actually use. When you pay rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed towards hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But Built is not just about rent. It's about rewarding you around your entire neighborhood. With Built, your rent finally works for you. You're earning points every month on something you already have to pay. Whether you're grabbing food at your favorite local restaurant or heading to the gym, you're still earning rewards. Built has made everyday life feel more rewarding, from your neighborhood to your travel plans. Turn your rent into rewards and start earning points around your neighborhood by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That's joinbilt.com/LockedOnNFL. Make sure to use that link so they know we sent you. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets made some franchise-altering moves today. In my first show today, I predicted they wouldn't. Can this team ever just work with me? But big moves for the Jets. These are the moves that define a head coach and a general manager. Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji trading Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams, two of the three genuine stars on this team, and bringing back a ton of draft picks, hoping to build a better Jets team for the future. Now, I know in some corners of the fan base, these moves will not be popular. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I have three big concerns with these moves. Number one, it just feels like we do this every couple of years. It just feels like we always go on the same cycle. I mean, isn't this exactly where we were in 2020 when the Jets traded Jamal Adams? They traded their best player. They got a bunch of draft picks. We had all this cap space coming in, and Jets said, just give it a couple of years. It'll all work out. And it feels like ever since 2011, this is where we've been. We may not have had as many draft picks under Mike McCagnon, but there was always a lot of cap space. Jets had all these assets. It's going to be fine. Go back to John Idzik. They had the 12 draft picks in 2014. They had all the cap space in 2014. It was going to work out. We're all going to be fine. So I can't really blame you if you're skeptical, because this Jets franchise has been selling you the same vision year after year after year. In fact, that's one of the things I was working through today, trying to process these moves, because I was genuinely shocked. I really, you can listen to today's show if you want to laugh. I mean, that's in the Hall of Fame. That shows a Hall of Famer for terrible predictions. I could not believe the Jets did this. And one of the things that I kept saying over and over when I was talking with people I know is, in theory, this all makes sense to me. You just loaded up with draft picks when your team is 1-7, when you need to turn things around. But it just feels like we've been here before, over and over. It feels like the same cycle goes over and over. And maybe it's not fair to Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, because they weren't responsible for any of the failures in the past cycles when the Jets have done this. But I think you could be forgiven for being a little skeptical of this, because this is the thing that happens over and over with the Jets. I mean, they never keep their good players. The good players are always sent out. We're always told that it's going to work out for the team in the long run, and it just feels like we're going around in a circle. So that's number one. I think you could be forgiven if you're frustrated with this, because you're right back where we always are, where we're being promised in a few years with all these assets, things are going to go great. The number two concern I have, and this is one I've expressed on the show, and this is why I was not a big proponent of trading these guys, is that I think that the idea of the total teardown sounds better in theory than it actually works in practice in most cases in the NFL. You've seen teams try these dramatic teardowns in the past. I mean, Miami did it back in 2019. Cleveland did it a few years before then. We've seen Jacksonville kind of dabble with that. And it's great to have all these assets, but sometimes, the old saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's not going to be easy for the Jets to replace the value that Sauce Gardner provided. It's not going to be easy for the Jets to replace the value that Quinnen Williams provided. And, contrary to what a lot of people are saying, there was every reason to believe that these guys both could have been high-end players the next time the Jets were good. And I think that the Jets through the years have kind of warped our ideas of how long it really takes to turn things around and how many assets it really takes to turn things around because they've been so bad at it. But you look across the league, when you start with a good foundation of players, it kind of becomes easier to build than it is starting from scratch because you have to hit on a lot of, Jets may have a lot of assets, but they're going to have to hit it on a very high percentage of these picks in order for these deals to work out. Sauce Gardner's not that old. And even though Quinnen Williams is approaching 30, he plays a position and he plays a style where I would not be surprised to see him continue to play at a high level for years to come. I'm still wrestling with whether I would have done these deals. I mean, the Quinnen Williams deal is a really good deal. I was thinking like the Jets would only get a first round pick for him, to get a 1 and a 2. That's what I may have done anyway, even if they hadn't done the Sauce Gardner trade. But once you've committed to this with by trading Sauce Gardner, I think it's almost like you had to do the Quinnen Williams trade. I think for Sauce Gardner, they got fair value. I can't come here and say the Jets got ripped off because 2 first round picks and I guess you threw in the wide receiver. Like that's about what I would, that's about what I'd expect would be fair value if you were actively looking to trade Sauce Gardner. But look, it's a risk. It's a big risk. And there was a path for the Jets to rebuild this thing with both of these guys. You've subtracted 2 pretty high-end players from this team, and there's no guarantee you're going to be able to replace them with the assets you've brought in. So I think that's another reason for pause. I know that's not going to be a popular thing to hear in a certain segment of the fan base, but I think it needs to be said. The third concern I have with this goes back to something I've been reading more and more over the last couple of weeks. It's about Aaron Glenn. And there's been some talk about how Aaron Glenn wants his guys on the team. Some of the guys on the team aren't really his guys. And, it's kind of funny because you think about like the lead up to Glenn being hired and then through the offseason, you've constantly heard about the influence Bill Parcells had on Aaron Glenn. And a lot of that's kind of unfair. It's not fair to compare Glenn to one of the top 10 coaches of all time before he's finished his first year. But there are ways Parcells obviously has influenced Glenn. And one of the worst things about Parcells was Parcells definitely had this tendency to really like certain guys and write other guys off. And he wasn't always right with the choices he made. Sometimes the guys that he loved, he'd bring them to every stop he was at. He'd bring them from the Giants to the Patriots or the Patriots to the Jets or the Jets to the Cowboys. And sometimes those guys weren't great contributors. And there were also some good players in these stops where he kind of chased them off. With the Jets, there was a defensive end, Hugh Douglas, who played really well early in his career, and Parcells got rid of him, sent him off to Philadelphia. He went on to have a very productive career, and the Jets really struggled to replace him. Now, it's a fine line. Every coach has their favorites. Every coach has guys that they want to buy into their program. I do have a little bit, and this is something that predates today, I do have a little bit of concern with Glenn. Is he too focused on getting his guys in here at the expense of, chasing off some really good players? Now, look, obviously, in the end, it worked out for Parcells. Parcells, like any coach, had positives and negatives. One of his negatives was his reliance on his own guys. That was outweighed by all the positives he brought to the table. So certainly, even if this is a negative for Aaron Glenn, it's something that could be outweighed. But I think it does exist. So I do think that there are some legitimate concerns. I think, look, this is a high risk, high reward set of moves the Jets made. I think there's no way around it. I think if you're not acknowledging the potential for positive and the potential for negative, you're not really offering a fair analysis. And I think it's very difficult to say whether or not these moves were good right now until we find out what the Jets do with the assets they got, because they got a lot in return, but there's no guarantees with any of them. So, you can have your, you can kind of have your view on whether or not it was the right move in theory. In practice is what matters, and what the Jets do with these assets will determine whether or not these moves were ultimately viewed as successful. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll focus more on the immediate. Now, these trades were obviously done with a long-term view in mind for the New York Jets, but I think they do have some immediate impacts on this 2025 team, particularly what expectations need to be for this team going forward, because I think they have changed, and we'll talk about how they've changed as we continue here on this special Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And you can also bet on the NFL at FanDuel. The line has moved after these trades. The Jets previously were 1.5-point home favorites over the Cleveland Browns. Well, after Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams were traded this afternoon, the Browns are now 2.5-point road favorites. No surprise there. And that's going to be a theme going forward in 2025. But FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday, a very eventful Tuesday for the New York Jets. In fact, I would think it's fair to say one of the most eventful days in franchise history, because the Jets have traded two star players, two guys who have been first team all pros in their careers with the Jets. Sauce Gardner goes to the Indianapolis Colts. Quinnen Williams goes to the Dallas Cowboys. A monumental day for the New York Jets. And most of the focus is on the future, but I do think we should talk a little bit about what this means for the presence of the New York Jets. And, as we just discussed, the line in this game has moved, and that's actually very telling. The fact that Cleveland Browns, who are an awful team this year, went from being road underdogs in MetLife Stadium to road favorites at MetLife Stadium. I think that speaks to how the rest of the season has changed. And, one of the things I've been talking about, not just since the season started, but you go back to the off season, I mentioned that I wanted to see the Jets play better the second half of the season than the first half. Now, I did not foresee an 0-7 start. I don't think a lot of people foresaw an 0-7 start. But even if the Jets had gotten off to like a decent start, you want to see the team show steady progress through the course of the season. You want to see the team show improvement. I don't think winning many games is going to be in the cards for the rest of the season for the 2025 Jets. And that will delight, I'm sure, a segment of the Jets fan base, because that means the Jets draft pick will be higher come the spring, and it will give the Jets the choice of the quarterback that they want. And I think we should all acknowledge now, especially with an extra first round pick, the Jets are drafting a quarterback this year. So there's a lot to get into, but I think now the Jets have one of the worst rosters in the NFL, and there's really only one elite talent left, Garrett Wilson. They had three, and three put them at about the middle of the pack. The problem was that while the Jets had some high-end talent entering the season, there were lots of areas where they had holes and they didn't have a lot of depth. So that's what kind of put them the bottom of the league. Now the Jets really don't have much elite talent beyond Garrett Wilson. So everything has changed. And you can't really expect the Jets to win more games because the talent level is so much lower. Now, what you're going to see is you're probably going to see even more young players step into the lineup, because Azareye'h Thomas, who was really the one young Jets player who wasn't seeing significant snaps, he's a starter now. Brandon Stevens mans the other outside spot. Azareye'h Thomas got his first start against the Cincinnati Bengals because Sauce Gardner was out. Now he's a full-time starter. He's going to get plenty of reps. And as we've discussed on the show, this is already a Jets team where you have an inordinate number of young players getting reps. Now, it'll be interesting to see how the Jets use their defensive linemen, particularly at the defensive tackle spot, because Harrison Phillips and Juwan Briggs kind of have the same role on the defense, but there's really not a lot that's great at the tackle spot anymore. I mean, I think Phillips and Briggs might be the two best tackles the Jets have. So, it might be a situation where you play the two of them together more. And, you're not going to get much pass rushing, but if you can shut down the run, it makes life easier for Jermaine Johnson, who was not traded, and Will McDonald, who was not traded, off the edge. If they can both eat up blockers, maybe that's the way you build your defense. But I think we're past the point now where wins and losses can really be used to judge the Jets' progress. I think it's really about player development right now. It's really about young guys continuing to make strides. It's about Armand Membou continuing to look really good at the right tackle spot, because I think that he's close. We're close to being able to call it for him that, he's going to be a quality starting right tackle for the Jets for years. The other side, Olu Fashanu, has been up and down. There were some games where Olu played well in the first half. Miami, Cincinnati, two teams without great pass rushers. I know Cincinnati has Trey Hendrickson, but he was injured. And then some real rough games for Olu. The question is, can he grow? Can he continue to make progress? You look at the backfield, Isaiah Davis, Breece Hall still here. Breece Hall was not traded. Isaiah Davis has gotten an opportunity as the number 2 back, showed some real quality signs against Cincinnati, a bad defense, but still an NFL team. Isaiah Davis has shown some promise. Can he make strides? Can Arian Smith show anything? And he had one big catch against the Bengals. He's kind of been quiet otherwise. Back on the other side of the ball, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. is off to a promising start for this team. In some ways the pressure's off. The pressure's been off because the Jets have been losing, but now the pressure is really off because there's no expectation the Jets are going to win a lot of games going forward. I mean, look, it's the NFL. I'm sure like they'll snatch a win or two along the way. Things will break their way. But there's really not much reason to expect that the Jets are going to win many games. So the focus now is just cultivating this young talent. Because if you ended up with a couple of good players in this class, and we could throw Malachi Moore in the mix in this draft class, that's the start. You have 2 back-to-back opportunities where you are going to have extra picks. We're going to have extra chances to add young elite talent, young difference-making talent. And really, 2 to 3 great draft classes are all you need to be a Super Bowl contender in this league. So it's all lined up for the New York Jets right now. Look, we can't expect many wins going forward because you just took 2 of the best starters off the team. But if you get some quality performers, if you're able to give these young guys reps, the Jets have been giving young guys reps left and right, but they're going to give the young guys even more reps going forward because there's no one else to turn to. So give them you hope that they take it and run with it. Mason Taylor, another guy who shows the promise against Cincinnati. I mean, we could name guys the entire episode, first and second year guys who are seeing significant reps for this team. Hopefully they grow up. Hopefully they show real signs that they're maturing as NFL players, because 2026, 2027, it's all going to be there for the Jets. Jets are going to have their pick of great prospects. They're going to take a quarterback. They're going to have an opportunity to build quality pieces around that quarterback. They're going to have an opportunity to build a young roster that can grow together. Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, through these trades, they've given up 2 really good players. They've given up 2 star-level talents. But they've also given themselves the opportunity to build a great Jets team. And we will have plenty more to talk about in the days and weeks ahead, because this is the type of move that really changes everything for a franchise. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow on Wednesday to talk more Jets.